Imagine a child who is 8 years old, waking up even before the sun rises. There is no warm breakfast, there is no lap to sit on, there is no school, there is only work. Now imagine this child walking barefoot, still with a fragile body, entering a place where the air she breathes is by itself a death sentence. She doesn't know it, but that ordinary day is just one more step toward the end. Her small hands are already marked and burned, cracked, deformed. Her eyes burn, her throat is dry, and the cough never goes away. At first it's just dust. Then comes the metallic taste in the mouth. And then the blood. Yes, blood. Because many of these children, even before turning 12, were already dying from the inside. Now answer me honestly, would you let your child enter a place like that, knowing that he would probably not make it out of childhood alive? Because that's exactly what happened. For centuries, thousands of children, every single day, were pushed into lead mines, poisoned workshops, scalding furnaces, places that today would be forbidden even for experienced adults. And the scariest part, it wasn't considered wrong, it was considered normal. While you listen to this right now, there were children who never played. They never had a single day of childhood, because every dawn was just one more chance to survive until nightfall, and many couldn't even do that. Now listen carefully, because in the next minute, you're going to discover what those jobs were, and why they killed in such slow and so brutal ways that even the adults themselves avoided entering them. But first, if this kind of story grabs you, revolts you, and makes you see the world with different eyes, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because what you're going to see today is going to make you never look at childhood the same way again. And the worst hasn't even started yet. Now take a deep breath, because what makes all of this even more disturbing is not just the jobs, it's the fact that nobody saw a problem with it. Today, when we think about childhood, we think about protection, learning, care. But in Antiquity and the Middle Ages, that simply didn't exist for the majority. If a child was born into a rich family, they learned to read, to write, they played, they were prepared to inherit power. But if they were born poor, they didn't get a toy, they got a function. At 5, 6, or 7 years old, they were already put to work, not because the parents were cruel, but because reality was even harsher. Hunger doesn't wait, the cold doesn't wait, misery doesn't forgive. Entire families depended on the labor of these children to survive one more day, and in a world where half of the children didn't even reach adulthood, childhood was seen as a luxury, not as a right. Now think about this. For many parents, putting their own child in a dangerous job wasn't a cruel choice. It was the only alternative between two deaths, dying while working, or dying of hunger. And this is where everything starts to get even heavier, because these weren't difficult jobs, they were jobs that adults avoided. But the children, smaller, lighter, more obedient, as were perfect for entering tight spaces, enduring absurd work hours. And mainly, they had no voice to complain. And while the world kept turning, empires grew, cities prospered, wealth was accumulated. All of this, sustained by small hands that nobody saw, and by lives that nobody counted. Now get ready, because in the next block, you're going to enter the places where these children worked. And when you understand what exactly they were forced to do, you'll realize that child labor doesn't even come close to describing what was really happening. Now, imagine your 9-year-old son. Stop for a second and really imagine it. Now put him inside a dark tunnel, so tight that an adult couldn't enter. The air is heavy, almost solid. Every breath burns from the inside. That was the daily life of boys in lead and silver mines. They spent hours, sometimes days, breathing toxic dust. The body started to fail slowly. Intense pain, weakness, tremors, until the lungs simply gave up. And when it wasn't the poison, it was the collapse. Now change the scene. Imagine your daughter, only 8 years old, dipping fabrics into liquids that burn the skin. Dye workshops and tanneries used acid, fermented urine, and even mercury. Yes, mercury. The same element that drove adults insane was handled by children every single day. The skin burned, the eyes became inflamed, and the mind started to get lost. Now, one more scene. Children in glass furnaces and iron workshops. The heat was so intense that breathing already hurt. Explosions were common, and burns were not accidents. They were routine, small bodies marked forever when they survived. And while that happened, girls spent hours on looms and spinning wheels, spines bending, bones deforming, vision lost in the endless repetition, early blindness. Bodies aged before the age of 15. Now answer me. How many of these children do you think reached adulthood? Few, very few. And the most brutal thing about all of this is that none of them chose to be there. They were placed there, pushed, silenced. And while you try to process all of this, in the next block you're going to understand what these jobs did to the bodies and minds of these children, day after day, until there was nothing left. And this is where this story stops being just shocking and becomes impossible to forget. If you think the worst has already passed, this is where the story really gets heavy, because these children didn't die quickly. It wasn't something immediate. It was slow, silent, cruel. It was a process. The body started to fail, piece by piece. First came the pain that a child shouldn't even know, in the back, in the legs, in the hands that never rested. Then, the deformities. Spines bending like dry branches, bow legs, fingers hardened, twisted, useless even before adolescence. Teeth fell out early, corroded by toxic vapors. The skin, stained, burned, wounded, with no chance to heal. And the lungs, the lungs. Every breath was an effort, every cough a warning, until the air simply stopped being enough. But perhaps the most disturbing thing wasn't what happened to the body. It was what happened to the mind. These children didn't play, they didn't dream, they didn't imagine the future, because they had no future. They grew up surrounded by pain, death and suffering, watching their colleagues disappear one by one. And that became normal. Death stopped being a shock and became routine. Now think about this coldly. A 10-year-old child, with the tired eyes of someone who had lived 40 years. No hope, no choice, no voice. They weren't just exploited, they were consumed. And when they finally couldn't work anymore, they were replaced, as if they had never existed. Now hold on to this, because in the next block, you're going to understand something even harder to accept. People knew about all of this, and even sowed as they continued. This is where this story stops being just sad and starts to revolt you, because no, this didn't happen hidden away. It wasn't a secret. The parents saw it, the masters knew, the authorities allowed it, and even so, they kept putting children in those places. Now, before judging, you need to understand the weight of the reality of that time. Many of these parents weren't cold, nor cruel. They were desperate. Between watching their child die slowly of hunger, or having a chance, even if minimal, of survival by working, they chose work. It was an impossible choice. But not everyone was a victim. Craftmasters bought children as apprentices, not to teach them, but to exploit them to the maximum. Physical punishments were common. Mistakes were punished with violence, and accidents were treated as something normal. A child died today. Another took their place tomorrow. Simple as that. No mourning, no record, no memory. And while that happened, kingdoms prospered. Grand constructions appeared. Markets grew. All sustained by a system that accepted without questioning that small lives were worth less. Now think about this. Love between parents and children existed. It always existed. But hunger, misery, and despair spoke louder. And that's what makes everything even more uncomfortable. Because they weren't monsters. They were ordinary people, doing what they thought was necessary to survive. But the result was an entire generation of children condemned before they even understood what it was to live. Now get ready, because in the final block, you're going to realize that this story didn't stay in the past. And maybe it's closer to our reality than you imagine. Now that you've seen all of this, let me show you the most uncomfortable part of all. These children didn't suffer in vain. Every mine dug, every fabric produced, every piece of metal forged helped build empires, sustain economies, raise cities that centuries later are still admired. The ancient world that we study today, romanticize and even idolize, was in part built upon the fragile bodies of these children. And that changes everything, doesn't it? Because behind every advance there was a brutal human price. Now comes the question that nobody likes to ask. Did this really end, or did it just move somewhere else? Today, while you watch this video in comfort, there are children working in cobalt mines, extracting materials for batteries that power cell phones, cars, and modern technology. There are children in textile workshops, sewing clothes in exhausting shifts, in conditions you just saw here. There are children handling chemical products, breathing dust, living exactly the same cycle, just far from your eyes. And that's what bothers most. Because the difference between those children and the ones today isn't the suffering, it's the distance, and our ability to ignore it. The story hasn't ended. It just became quieter. Now I ask you for real, after everything you've seen here, can you still look at the world the same way? If this story shocked you, if it made you reflect, if it pulled you out of your comfort zone, leave your like right now, comment down below. I'll never complain about my job again. And share this video with someone who needs to open their eyes, because these are the stories that school never told, and that the world still tries to hide. Subscribe to the channel, because the next story might be even more disturbing.